Yuka, as we've been reporting our top story this evening, Donald Trump agreeing to pause proposed new tariffs for Mexico following an 11th hour deal on border security. Tell us more.
Well, after getting Mexico's president to agree to send 10,000 more troops to the border, Donald Trump announced a 1-month delay in implementing a 25% tariff on Mexican goods to allow more time to negotiate. He's also been speaking with the Canadian Prime Minister and says tariff talks with China could also take place within hours, though a 25% duty on Canadian goods and a 10% levy on Chinese imports are still set to go into effect on Tuesday. Trump has said that the planned tariffs were a response to the illegal trafficking of fentanyl. So what role do Mexico, Canada and China play in the drugs trade? Jenny Shin explains.
When Donald Trump announced tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, he said the move is partly to stop illegal fentanyl from flowing into the United States. But just how big a role do these three countries play in the opioid entering the US? According to the US Drug Enforcement Administration, China is the primary source of the substance trafficked internationally. Following a crackdown by US and Chinese authorities on traffickers in recent years, much of that flow has allegedly been rerouted through cartels in Mexico. Authorities say rather than shipping fentanyl directly to the US, Chinese drug traffickers send precursor chemicals to Mexico, where they can then be turned into fentanyl before being sent on to the US. But Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has repeatedly said that authorities have found no proof that fentanyl is being produced in her country, and both Mexico and China insist that the crisis is fundamentally America's problem.
If the US government and its agencies wanted to address the serious consumption of fentanyl in its country, why don't they start by tackling the sale of narcotics on the streets of its main cities? Or the purchase of these drugs by people who are addicted? Why have we never heard of arrests in the US of their own criminal groups?
Trump has also called Canada a big player in the fentanyl trade. However, in 2022, a commission established by Congress found that Canada is not known to be a major source of fentanyl or precursor chemicals to the US. In 2024, US border agents seized around 19 kilograms of fentanyl at the northern border, compared with almost 9,600 kilograms at the border with Mexico.
Well, meanwhile, Yuka, business groups, economists, lawmakers, they're all cautioning against these new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China. How are the markets reacting?
Well, markets breathed a sigh of relief after a delay on tariffs on Mexico was announced. The Mexican peso jumped against the US dollar, up about 1.3% for the day. This after falling more than 2% to its lowest level in nearly 3 years. Wall Street has had a choppy trading day. The Dow Jones briefly crept back into positive territory, but ended the day in the red. The S&P 500 closed below the 6,000 mark, and the Nasdaq declined by 1.2%. Car makers suffered heavy losses, with General Motors closing down more than 3%. Across the Atlantic, Stellantis, the owner of US brand Chrysler, and Volkswagen were both down over 4% at the close, as Donald Trump also warned the EU was next on his tariff list.
And the auto industry, it's among the most vulnerable to these new tariffs, isn't it?
Companies that are not headquartered in either Mexico nor Canada are vulnerable to a tariff spat between the US and its largest trading partners. General Motors, Stellantis, Mazda, Ford, Honda and Toyota are expected to be among the hardest hit. Last November, ratings agency S&P Global estimated that in the worst-case scenario, GM and Stellantis could see their core profits decline 20% this year, and other major car makers would also see significant hits to their profits. Many car makers see North America as one large production hub, and their supply and investment models have been based on free and duty-free movements of parts and finished products across the US's border with Mexico and Canada.
There was this understanding that, especially within the trade agreement, those countries that were part of it, US, Canada, and Mexico, there would be some sort of stability because they will have a framework that will stick. That is essentially telling us that that is no longer the case and anything can happen. So that uncertainty is going to cause disruptions in terms of companies' planning, companies' investments.